The Israeli cabinet is set to start discussing the annexation of land in the West Bank. The plans have faced a lot of opposition from Palestinians and many other countries, excluding the United States, which drafted the peace plan being put into effect. All right, now, a video has emerged of Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng commenting on Israel. In the footage, he says that as a Christian, he's obliged to love and pray for Israel and that his nation would be cursed if he doesn't do so. Well, Africa4 Palestine intends to lay a complaint with the Judicial Service Commission over those comments. Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng faces a complaint, as said, to be laid at the Judicial Service Commission by Africa4 Palestine following those remarks. Well, to share some insights on this developing story, I'm now joined by Muhammed Desai, who's the director for #Africa4 Palestine. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for covering this issue.
All right, so supporting a country, is it the same as supporting its politics?
Well, I think the Chief Justice, our issue with the Chief Justice's utterances is that, firstly, he conflates the biblical land of Israel with the modern state of Israel. He talks about he conflates the Israelites of the Bible with the Israelis today that are overseeing the Israeli regime. It's as stupid as trying to confuse the Mecca that we read about in the Holy Quran with the regime of Saudi Arabia. And to criticize the regime of Saudi Arabia or to criticize the regime of Israel should be allowed by any citizen of South Africa.
All right, so, but he does talk about an opportunity to talk to both sides to find peace.
Well, let's first deal with his political comments, which some analysts are suggesting that he shouldn't have actually ventured into, being the Chief Justice of South Africa. But this comment about South Africa having the opportunity, he uses Nelson Mandela as his model for suggesting that the solution to Israel and Palestine are people sitting and talking to each other. Well, Nelson Mandela came to the negotiating table after certain very basic requirements were met. For example, the release of political prisoners. And likewise, the international community, including South Africa at a political level, is insisting that Israel abides to certain international law standards. For example, ending its occupation, which has been deemed unlawful by the United Nations and various other international and global bodies. And so nobody is suggesting that we shouldn't enter into negotiations or we shouldn't suggest to the Palestinians and Israelis to enter into negotiations. But surely certain basic legal requirements should be met before that stage is entered into.
All right, and you're concerned as well about possible impartiality, given that COSATU and the SA Jewish Board of Deputies are involved in a case before the Constitutional Court.
Well, this is where it gets interesting, is that there are two cases where we feel, there are two issues where we feel the Chief Justice has violated the Code of Conduct of the Judicial Service Commission, and this is why we have lodged a complaint, and I can confirm to viewers that we have already lodged that complaint earlier today. The first is that judges are supposed to avoid entering into political controversies. This is a very clear article of the Code of Conduct. But secondly, you are quite correct that there is currently a matter dealing with Israel and Palestine that is in front of the Constitutional Court, and even more problematic, the Chief Justice was a presiding judge during the hearing just a few weeks ago. And so this is the problem that we are articulating in our complaint to the Judicial Service Commission. It is a very awkward position because the complaints are supposed to be handled by the Chief Justice, and in this instance, it is the Chief Justice himself that we are complaining about.
What would you like to see happen then at the Judicial Service Commission with regards to this matter?
Well, I think that there are three matters. The first is...
Hello, Mr. Desai, are you still there? Mr. Desai? All right, it looks like we may have lost him for the moment. We're going to try and there you go. All right, so Mr. Desai, thanks so much. We'd lost you for a couple of seconds. You said that there are 3 matters.
The first is that there are very clear disciplinary actions in which the Judicial Service Commission can take against any member that violates the code of conduct. But secondly, in the very least, the Chief Justice needs to recuse himself from this matter, which is currently in front of the Constitutional Court. But thirdly, I think that we welcome the public conversation that has taken place, and also in two aspects. The first aspect is the separation between the judiciary and the executive, and then the second is the conversation that's currently taking place about Israel and the distinction between your biblical Israel, the modern state of Israel, a state which is clearly a serial violator of international law.
Being pro-Israel does not necessarily mean being anti-Palestine.
Absolutely. And I don't think that the South African government is necessarily cursing the Israeli regime. The South African government is simply asking for Israel to abide, like any other state, to international law and to respect various UN resolutions.
All right, so I'm referring to the judge here. Being pro-Israel doesn't necessarily mean that he's anti-Palestine.
Yes, but the suggestion by the judge in his webinar that he needs to turn a blind eye to the violations of the Israeli regime simply because he feels that he will be cursed. This is a very bizarre logic. There are clear violations of international law. We're not asking the Chief Justice to become pro-Palestinian. We're simply asking him to respect the various international law pronouncements on the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories.
All right, so what would you like, I mean, the Judicial Services Commission, you said you've laid your complaint. How long does the process take? When do you think you'll get some kind of response on this issue?
Well, Peter, I think that we are also, I mean, on the one hand, we're going to be following our rights in terms of lodging a complaint with the Judicial Service Commission. We do know that they are usually inundated with the various issues, but we hope that they will prioritize this issue, seeing that we are dealing with the Chief Justice. We're talking with the apex of our judiciary in this country. And secondly, at the same time, however, we are open to meeting with the Chief Justice to see if there is any understanding that we can come to, and for us to have a discussion with the Chief Justice. Really, we are open to this sort of mechanism.
What do you think Christians need to understand about this issue of Jerusalem, about Israel, Christianity, Judaism, and how it all comes together, particularly also with the many Muslims that live in the region?
I think that the Chief Justice has done a disservice, in particular to the indigenous Palestinian Christians, who are said to be the descendants of Jesus Christ himself. I think that we as the international community are doing a disservice to the Christians of Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, the small holy town of Bethlehem, which is almost completely encircled by this 8-meter high wall that Israel has built in order to enclave the Palestinians into what has now become the Bethlehem ghetto. I think that in many ways we fall for the trap by the Israeli regime that this is a religious issue, but it's no more religious issue than what apartheid South Africa was. In many ways, the Palestinian Christians are a forgotten people. People forget that, for example, the two holy towns, Bethlehem and Jerusalem, are actually two Palestinian towns, and that the Palestinians who go to the Church of Nativity or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are completely under a brutal Israeli occupation. The Palestinian Christians are calling out on the Christians of the world to remember them as the living stones of Jerusalem, as the living stones of Bethlehem. And so in this light, we really do welcome the South African Council of Churches and various other churches that are taking stronger and stronger positions in terms of insisting that Israel respects international law, that Israel respects the right of Palestinian Christians in particular, but of all Palestinians living in the Holy Land.
All right, so what do you make of where the Chief Justice says, as a citizen of our great country, we are denying ourselves a wonderful opportunity of being a game changer in the Israeli-Palestinian situation?
Well, I guess we need to ask him what he was talking about. A game changer would be to put pressure, as the South African government has done, by downgrading the South African embassy in Tel Aviv. I think that coming from our history, we know the potent gift of international boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, and how this pressure put on the apartheid government of South Africa forced them to come to the negotiating table. This sort of game-changing tactics should be escalated and intensified, as they're a non-violent expression of our solidarity and of our humanism, of our interconnectedness with other suffering people, no matter where they may be, whether it's in Palestine, Cuba, or elsewhere.
All right, so you've made it clear what you'd like the Judicial Services Commission to do. What would you like the Chief Justice to do after hearing your complaint and your concerns? What would be the right thing for him to do in your view?
Well, from a legal perspective, he should recuse himself from the current case, and there may be a possibility, as some analysts are suggesting, that he should recuse himself from all human rights related cases, which really puts the Chief Justice in a predicament. However, I think that the Chief Justice, at a personal level, should really look into the verse that he quotes. He quoted Psalms 116, that we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I would really urge him to look deep and really consider the plight of the Palestinian Christians living in Jerusalem who are under subjugation and oppression.
Have you tried to have a conversation with him?
No, we haven't, but we'd be open to that.
All right, because perhaps maybe some of these things can get lost in translation, and maybe you might be able to persuade him, or he might be able to explain some of the things that he says.
Absolutely, we're open to that. However, Peter, I think that we do need to keep in mind that the Chief Justice participated in this event that was well advertised beforehand. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistaken comment that was recorded. This was a publicly advertised event where he was introduced as the Chief Justice of South Africa, and it seemed as if he was speaking in his official capacity.
All right, so your bottom line, justices like him should stay out of politics?
Nobody should be above justice. That is what we are insisting on.
All right, so that's where we're going to have to leave it for this evening. Thanks so much indeed, and hopefully we'll chat to you again on the progress of your complaint, and let's see how it gets resolved.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you so much. That's Muhammed Desai, who's the director of #Africa4 Palestine, sharing their concerns about utterances made by the Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng in his support for Israel and criticism of South African foreign policy with regards to Israel.